News Center Maine is partnering with the-maine-monitor to bring you some of the reporting being done by journalists at the nonprofit independent publication. And we are featuring one of their stories every Monday right here on News Center Maine. So today we are talking about resources for those experiencing domestic violence. Most centers devoted to helping survivors rely heavily on federal funding, but that funding is now in question, resulting in resource centers that are implementing hiring freezes, and several positions have now been left unfilled. So joining us to talk about the issue is Yasmin Khan, a Fitzgerald Public Policy Reporting Fellow for the-maine-monitor, which has recently published her story on this very topic. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with some basics in terms of how domestic violence resource centers are funded right now in Maine.
Yeah, so it's a mix of federal funding from the state, and private sources of funding. It's worth noting, though, that federal grants make up a significant portion of many of these resource centers' annual budgets. I spoke to 5 resource centers for this story, and federal funding made up anywhere between 40% and 85% of their annual budgets.
So that's a big portion of what they need to survive is coming from the federal government. A lot of questions about what may happen with that funding at this point. What are these groups doing to at least try to prepare for that?
So the main thing we're seeing is hiring freezes. Organizations are implementing hiring freezes, which means that they are not filling vacant positions and they're operating while understaffed.
When we talk about vacancies, and I think a number of industries, of course, are experiencing that of, okay, we have to cut down on staff or not filling positions. In these centers that are helping survivors of domestic violence, what is that impact? What does that look like when they don't necessarily have the staff they're used to having?
Yeah, so it places an enormous amount of strain on the remaining staff. I spoke to one advocate whose caseload had more than doubled, in part because of a hiring freeze at their workplace. And in some cases, these organizations even have to pare back on some of the services they offer. So for example, at one organization I spoke to, they're no longer able to accompany the survivors they work with to legal proceedings because of vacancies on their legal advocacy team.
Now that's something I've actually not heard about. We often hear about the resources of housing or somewhere for someone to go safely. Hadn't realized that there's often that component, and that's being cut back now.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a common misconception. I think when people think of domestic violence resource centers, they think of shelters and residential programs, which are a really core part of the services these centers offer. But domestic violence impacts so many different areas of a person's life, and I think these organizations try to provide services to really provide as much support as they can. So you will often see like legal services teams. Many of these places offer helplines. They offer support with childcare and with navigating CPS. And all of these services are being impacted by these hiring freezes.
Something to watch closely again, and we were talking before we started chatting here that questions about federal funding are impacting so many things. This is certainly one of them. So we appreciate your reporting, especially the impact right here in Maine. Yasmin, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, if you want to learn more about the reporting Yasmin's doing or anyone on the team at the-maine-monitor, you can do that online right now at the-maine-monitor.org.